It's my nerd world, and welcome to it. A Star Wars show. I wasn't planning on doing a show this week. With the finale of The Mandalorian Season 3 and no Bad Batch, there wasn't a lot of news until I found a couple of really interesting things to talk about. Specifically, details of the ditched Damon Lindelof Rey movie and details of the upcoming Mando-verse Dave Filoni movie. Yes, I'm coining Mando-verse. I don't know if anybody's done it yet, but if they haven't, I'm taking ownership of it. I haven't heard anybody say it, so in my opinion, I'm the one that coined it, Mando-verse. So we do have things to talk about, and you do get a podcast this week. I hope you feel special. I don't really mean that. I'm just glad I'm able to find really interesting things to talk about, and I'm excited to do so. So I'm not going to waste any more time.
Nothing will stand in our way.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
I will finish what you started.
Who are you? I'm no one.
There are stories about what happened.
It's true. All of it.
The Force. It's calling to you.
My nerd world.
Just let it in.
And welcome to it, a Star Wars show. I'm your host, Jon Justice. Watched The Last Jedi this week. Looking forward to watching The Rise of Skywalker this week. And it had been a little while since I'd watched those movies. And once again, a little bit of distance from those films and just brings about another level of enjoyment. I found myself enjoying The Last Jedi and just putting my phone aside and hiding it and just letting the movie wash over me like a warm breeze, as fun and as exhilarating as always. It did get me thinking, though, especially in light of the news this week, what would have been had either J.J. Abrams filmed and directed all three of the sequel trilogy movies, or if Rian Johnson had done all three of the sequel trilogy movies. That is to say, I love all three of the movies, but I think that they probably could have benefited. They would have been a little less disjointed. And I don't mean in terms of storytelling. I'm fine with the way the story was told. But in terms of the visual look of the films, to me, from The Force Awakens to The Last Jedi, it's the most jarring. Rian Johnson has a very distinctive look to his films, as does J.J. Abrams to a certain extent. I feel like The Rise of Skywalker was a very good combination, and I've mentioned this before, a very good combination of what J.J. did in The Force Awakens and what Rian Johnson did in The Last Jedi. And even with the look and the color palette of the film, to me, the most disjointed is between, if you go from The Force Awakens directly to The Last Jedi. Again, for me personally, the visual style is just so different. But still, love all the movies for different reasons. But I do wonder what it could have been like if one director had been at the helm of all three films. We'll never know. We got the movies that we got, and I still love them for what they are. All right, we have news this week, speaking of movies. Movies that have been ditched, movies that are yet to be made. Let's go ahead and dive into it.
This is not going to go the way you think.
So Damon Lindelof, talked about him quite a bit on the show for those that are not that familiar with him. A creator of Lost, The Leftovers. He was one of the writers brought in on Prometheus, was a part of some of the Star Trek films, has kind of been circling in J.J. Abrams' orbit for a long time. He was set to write a new Star Wars movie. He spoke to Variety and gave us a little bit more details as to what happened with the movie that he was penning. In the wake of the latest Star Wars sequel trilogy, one of the most exciting projects Lucasfilm announced was a film by Damon Lindelof. Though, after April's Star Wars celebration, we learned of the three new films, none of which involved Lindelof. It became clear that his project would not be moving forward. It's a bummer. Lindelof certainly would have made something compelling. According to rumors circulating online, Lindelof's script had an elderly Rey, maybe an elder Rey, I don't think elderly is the right term, but an elder Rey training 2 new Jedi Knights, one of whom would have been played by a Watchmen star, Yahya Abdul-Mateen II, who was also in, I'm trying to think of which movies. He was in Ambulance, he was in Aquaman, he was also in Matrix Resurrections. But Disney announced this past spring that documentarian Sharmeen Obaid-Chinoy would helm a film led by Rey, which we believe that Lindelof was writing for, which may explain the studio's reasons for moving in another direction. Now, I have a little bit more details on this from MakingStarWars.net, and I'll share that with you here in just a moment. But in the latest episode of Explain This, and I said this was from Variety, my apologies, this was from Esquire, Lindelof revealed for the first time that he did not leave the Star Wars universe by his own accord. I was in more than talks to join the Star Wars universe, Lindelof says. I joined the Star Wars universe and was asked to leave. Previously, he told Variety, that's why I got my wires crossed, that his axed script was a true labor of love and that there would still be a new film, but unfortunately not with me. Whatever went down, it must have been a matter of creative differences from Lucasfilm's side, especially since they're bringing back Daisy Ridley. Will I get back in line outside the club and try to get back in? Lindelof asks himself in an interview. Absolutely. The original Star Wars was the first film the director ever saw in theaters, and he's still in love with the storytelling. If at first you don't succeed, try again, he jokes. Or, again, try, as Yoda would say. Lindelof is currently working on a new Peacock original series. Anyways, he didn't talk a little bit more about that original series. So here's a little bit more of what I know, or at least what I've been told in terms of rumors of what happened with this. It sounds as if Lindelof was working towards completing his script. This new Sharmeen Obaid-Chinoy was brought in as the director, and there may have been some creative differences as to how prominent of a role Daisy Ridley would play in the film, where Damon Lindelof's script had Rey more of a side character. It seems as if they wanted to move Rey to a more central character, and this may have been where the differences met. There was some interesting commentary on Making Star Wars with the hosts, and one of them made a great point, and that is, the director ends up having final say on these films. If you hire a director that you want and there's a writer that's written a script, rarely does it ever go the writer gets his way. The director typically goes and gets his way. There's also been some rumors this week that perhaps John Boyega and the character Finn could also play a prominent role in this movie post The Rise of Skywalker, that is supposed to be the first of these 3 new films to potentially make it to the big screen in the next couple of years. All of this continues to point to what I've said from the get-go, that the most logical thing to happen here is that this ends up being a de facto episode 10, if not episode 10. And it seemed pretty clear at Star Wars Celebration in Europe that when they brought Daisy Ridley out on stage, this was not an announcement of her being in the movie as being a secondary character or an Obi-Wan Kenobi type, and more of this was going to be a story that would center around her. So, we'll know in fairly short order. My understanding is from the rumors that this film will go into pre-production later this year and probably start shooting in February of next year. So I would imagine within the next, a handful of months, we'll have a pretty good idea of what the cast actually looks like beyond Daisy Ridley, including if John Boyega's Finn ends up in the film. Now, John Boyega has been very sort of butthurt over what he thinks was an unfair storytelling of his character Finn. I would tend to disagree. When I watch those films, it seems, from my view, that Finn's character was given plenty to do. He had a central story in The Last Jedi, certainly had a major role to play throughout the film of The Rise of Skywalker. I never really understood this complaint that I've heard, not just from John Boyega, but from fans, that his character was sidelined. I understand that there perhaps was some misunderstanding that he was supposed to be a Jedi at some point in time. but that didn't, play into Rian Johnson's script. Be that as it may, every time I watch The Last Jedi and we have whether you like it or not, we do. We have, the scenes and the journey that he and Rose take, the epic battle that he ends up having with Captain Phasma. I mean, the length of that movie being 2.5 hours, the chunk of that film that he takes up. I mean, if you broke that up into a series, into a live action series, I mean, he would have several episodes that were devoted solely to his character and his story. You could probably make his own series based off of what he did with he and Rose. And then, of course, as I mentioned, he's with the core group of characters from beginning to end in the Rise of Skywalker. So I never understood the complaints about his character Finn being sidelined or, given sort of second billing. I mean, it was always sort of clear that he was second billing to Rey's character. So let's move on. Another story comes out of Entertainment Weekly. This is not about a ditched movie, but about a movie that is yet to be made and is still supposed to be made. When it was announced earlier this month at Star Wars Celebration in London that Dave Filoni would be directing the new Star Wars feature film for theaters, set in the same post-Return of the Jedi timeline of what I'm now calling the Mando-verse, the natural question became whether the movie was a landing spot for an Avengers-type meetup between characters from all 4 series. Entertainment Weekly asked Dave Filoni and producing partner Jon Favreau, of course the showrunner and creator of The Mandalorian, the exact question when they joined the EW podcast, and the secrecy-loving duo did not bother denying an all-star outing was in the works for the big screen. We're in the right area code, said Filoni. We're definitely in the right place. I think it's going to be a clamoring of characters saying, how do I get in this picture? And that's what John and I have been figuring out. For Filoni, his live action feature film directing debut is the pinnacle of a journey that he began when George Lucas hired him to run Star Wars Clone Wars, the animated series that debuted back in 2008. And then moved into Filoni's partnership with Favreau for The Mandalorian. I think for a long time, as I've learned to work in this galaxy, it's a long play, Filoni says. And if things go right, if you get to do more of your story, things, I think, have broken in a good way for us, and people have enjoyed the characters that we've been making. So certain opportunities came up the further we went along. As for the setting of the new series, years after Return of the Jedi, the beginning of The Mandalorian takes place 5 years after the Return of the Jedi. Filoni feels it's the perfect gap just waiting to be filled. Growing up with the original films, Return of the Jedi was the end, he says. But then you're always like, but what happens next? And then when Episode 7 was set so many years later, when I was a kid, I never would have thought it would have been that much later, but it made sense. It created an opening where you go, wow, so a lot of things that we knew before are probably in there. How do we excavate that? Now, Favreau hints that it may not just be characters and planets from TV shows that pop up in their film, which is rather interesting. Kind of opens up the door to a lot of speculation. A hint backed up by Lucasfilm chief Kathleen Kennedy, who told Entertainment Weekly that there are a lot of sources he's drawing from to see where we are going. And it seems like some of those sources could even be ones that are no longer considered canon since the newer films charted a different course. Now, I'll leave it up to the other podcasts who are more familiar with the expanded universe now legends than I am, but it does sort of, raise questions in my mind of perhaps the bringing in of the Yuuzhan Vong, if I'm saying that correctly. Now, I'm not familiar with those books. I know that for many of those books, they were a central enemy in the storytelling. We know that we're getting Thrawn, but I've always kind of been scratching my head going, all right, so how is Thrawn going to assemble an army big enough for the heroes to have to go and take on? And that's not necessarily something that needs to be even all that, like, that's not even something that I consider to be difficult. You can tell smaller scale stories with still high stakes. It doesn't have to be this empire taking over the entire galaxy, per se. I mean, we think we saw something on a very small level in the finale of The Mandalorian Season 3. However, with Favreau clearly hinting at some characters from the expanded universe and now Legends perhaps being in this film, that's the first thing that popped into my mind. Also, Mara Jade. And I know that sounds weird, but Mara Jade within the fandom is, has reached sort of a cult status. And while she's not talked about much anymore, I think it's mostly because most people just expect that Mara Jade's never going to make an appearance as being the love interest to Luke Skywalker. But I could see them introducing that character and maybe not attaching her to Luke Skywalker. Although I have read several times that apparently George Lucas hates Mara Jade, so who knows. When it comes to deciding which characters will make the jump from either TV shows, video games, novels, or comic books, Favreau says that he and his partner try to channel their inner child. We joke that it's like we're playing with action figures. Hey, I've used that before. And like, what's in this box? Let's play with what's in the box. And that's what you do when you're playing and you're a kid. Which action figures they ultimately pluck out of the box will be determined by where the story takes them. As we are getting deeper and deeper into this, Favreau explains, you start to really have to map things out and figure out what that story is, and then have those characters fulfill what their growth cycle is and what their mythic hero's journey is. Those things have to fit together well. Otherwise, it won't feel like Star Wars. That approach follows the map that the original franchise creator drew almost 50 years ago. That's always been George's base, Favreau says. He's a student of Joseph Campbell. How does it fit into the narrative that has the hero's journey? And so, as we have more and more characters line up, you have to figure out how those characters are arcing and if it feels ultimately like a Star Wars story. One of the things that I feel like, I guess it's unfair to say the other live-action shows didn't have this, but one of the things that I did appreciate about The Mandalorian and why I think The Mandalorian was such a success was because it really was, in the absence of thinking of anything else, it really was one of the first times that you had a creative talent in Jon Favreau who had a way to play with a story much in the same way that George did, where he had almost a fresh canvas to paint with. Now, you could say that with J.J. Abrams in The Force Awakens, but still, there was a sort of a hero's journey story that needed to be told, and they really did pull upon a lot of which came before in The Force Awakens, whereas The Mandalorian was this new character. I do believe that it was most likely supposed to be something more of a Boba Fett, and it changed, which is why Boba Fett ended up becoming the character that he did, which was much different than what so many fans of the expanded universe, now Legends Boba Fett, were used to. I think The Mandalorian was supposed to be more aligned with that, and so they had to sort of move Boba Fett in a different direction and tell this much different story of him sort of finding himself as a post-ruthless bounty hunter. But what Favreau's done with The Mandalorian, I think, is the closest to being aligned with that creative freedom that George Lucas had. And all of this is to say that I hope that one day that there is a director, writer who is able to, and maybe it ends up being this first Jedi story that's going to be told. With James Mangold of Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, Ford versus Ferrari, Logan, Wolverine, with him going back thousands of years and having a clean slate, perhaps that's the opportunity that I've been waiting for, even though that's not necessarily a story that I'm clamoring for. I know he was quoted in some interviews out of Star Wars Celebration of saying that, don't expect this to be sort of a technology-less world. There will be some technology in it, which I was, very thankful to hear. I didn't want, I know he said something on a biblical scale, but I really didn't want like a completely stripped down version of Star Wars. I like my ships is what I'm trying to say. But Mandalorian, I think, has been so successful because there has been sort of a clean slate to play with. And I think that Mangold, out of all the stories that are being told, is the one that has the cleanest slate, where he can bring in, within the Star Wars universe, a completely fresh vision to the storytelling without being hamstrung by anything around it, since it's the first thing that ever happened. I mean, that was really what made Star Wars so special, was what George Lucas really set out to create. And it's been done a few times in storytelling, and I think for me personally, the one example that I point to most often would be The Matrix, especially that original Matrix movie, with what those two brothers at the time did in that Matrix movie was really pull together the things that they loved into that story and did this sort of genre mashup while also, tapping into the eternal storytelling that works so well in its own version of a hero's journey in the story of Neo, with a lot of overtly Christian themes attached to it. It's something that I tempted to do in my EMBARK story, probably not, and certainly not to the success that these other individuals did, but that's what I did with my story, is I tried to mash up the genres that I love the most: science fiction, space opera, disaster, films and books, sort of a love story akin what I grew up with in the 80s and early 90s, and what I enjoy seeing in what James Cameron does when he injects the love stories into his epic science fiction tales. I mean, that's what I tried to do with EMBARK. I mean, it was the reason why I wrote EMBARK. So that's what I look forward to the most, and I think that's why The Mandalorian has been the most successful of all the series. It wasn't tied to anything like Obi-Wan was. It didn't go off the beaten path like the Book of Boba Fett did in terms of what people expected. It just ended up giving us something fresh and new. And then in this last season, told a really interesting story, in my opinion, and I'm really beginning to appreciate season 3 even more now that it's finished, and looking forward to a rewatch of it, in telling the story of the Mandalorian and Bo-Katan. Last thing I'll say, and then we'll get to some listener feedback, is I actually started a rewatch of Andor in the background while doing some other things, and I'm finding myself gravitating towards it and thinking I may just watch it and not have it be in the background. That wasn't something that I expected, and maybe some distance from the show, having such high expectations for it and having it not quite land the way that I wanted to, with some distance, I think maybe I might appreciate it a little bit more. So I will do that, and then, you know what? I will get back to you on that.
I need someone to show me my place in all this.
Listener feedback to TalkShowNerd@gmail.com. Hi, John. I've just finished watching the season finale. It was good, but really I expected more. When it finished, I said, that's all? Good fights, I have to give you that. I was waiting like a cliffhanger with Ahsoka. Overall, I feel season 2 was way better than this one. Now let's wait for Ahsoka. Yeah, and it won't be long. I mean, it's going to be here in a couple of months. SheVP writes, totally agree, John. 10 out of 10 episode. It's my favorite episode of the season, and my second favorite finale behind Luke's. I love that they had Din and Grogu fighting together. I was cheering. LOL. With Grogu sensing the mythosaur, I wonder if they're going to have some kind of connection in the future. Can't wait for Ahsoka. Great show as usual. Thank you, SheVP. Let's see. JR writes, not a fan, more of a friend, enjoyer of Star Wars. Been enjoying the podcast. Watched the final episode of Mando. Struck by the reverence shown by the Mandos at the lighting of the Forge. Any reverence shown for anything today? Also wondering about Beskar. Maybe you can answer. Can't be lightsaber cut, right? Can't be shot through with some blasters, right? Lots of blaster kills in Mando/fake Mando fight. Did the fake Mandos have armor cracks like the real Mandos do? Yeah, I assume that they were shot in the areas where the fabric was exposed. I can look up Star Wars armor weapons, but would love your take. So much fun to watch regardless. More please is my statement. Season really built, grew, delivered at the end, in my opinion. Enjoyer of Star Wars, JR. Yeah, I think that was the insinuation that I had, was that they were able to blast them around the armor, and that's why it took them so many shots to take down those troopers. I really, on a second and third rewatch of the season finale, which, watching The Last Jedi, by the way, and when the Praetorian Guards show up for the Rey and Kylo Ren fight, it really did add to it, knowing that we've now seen the Praetorian Guards in action in The Mandalorian as well, and expecting that eventually we're going to get more of the Snoke story told. But going back and watching the season finale again, boy, the design of Moff Gideon's full outfit and those troopers was really awesome. It's been a while, and I said this on last week's show, but it's really been a while since I've wanted to get my hands on some specific action figures, and I've been saving a lot of my money as well. You can't spend all your money on toys when you get older. You have things you have to save for. That being said, I definitely want the Moff Gideon full armor Dark Trooper outfit and some of those white troopers that he had. I think that was pretty cool. That was pretty cool. That season finale was just a lot of fun, and it really hit all the Star Wars notes, in my opinion, and it's one that is going to be getting many rewatches from me. It's funny because while season 3 is arguably my least favorite of the 3 seasons, it might be the one I watch most often, simply because it's got the best action that I enjoy in it. We'll have to see. I'll have to do a full rewatch from start to finish of all 3 seasons together and sort of make a final verdict on that. But like so much of my Star Wars fandom, it changes and adjusts depending on mood. All right, that wraps up the show this week. As always, if you happen to be a new listener to the show, I hope you'll support my Nerd World and the podcast. If you're a reader and you like sci-fi, go and check out my science fiction space opera series, EMBARK. It's an exciting mix of The Expanse, if you're familiar with The Expanse, Fast and Furious, and Star Wars. I know it sounds weird, but it's true. Plus, it's got a dash of Ready Player One and elements of the sci-fi adventures from the 70s through the 2000s. 7 books in all in the series. Book 1, Treasure in Darkness. 2, The Vanishing War. 3, Gone Corbijn and the Asteroid of Misfortune. 4, The Rocket Queen. Book 5, Fear the Dangerous Night. Book 6, and the finale, EMBARK Battle Planet. Book 7. All available in ebook, paperback, hardcover, and audiobook, plus free on Kindle Unlimited. Got to mention that as well. Head to Amazon.com or mynerdworld.net for more details. Follow a ragtag squadron of pilots and one reluctant hero, or is it 2, on a journey of survival from Earth to the far reaches of space as they fight for humanity's future among the stars. Good for kids ages 11 plus, but it is written for adults. I hope you'll go and check out my science fiction space adventure space opera series, again, on Amazon, Jon Justice, or mynerdworld.net. So, in the meantime, I hope wherever you are happy, you are healthy, and you are safe. And hopefully there's some more news, and I'll talk to you again next week. Bye.
The Force will be with you, always.
My Nerd World.